to Social Progress Town Hall. Hey! Exactly. Look, what a place to be. You get to be invigorated. It makes it much easier when you're throwing things. Have you tried throwing things when you're sitting down? It's terrible. Here, standing up, you've got all the space, especially for waving your arms and shouting later on. Okay? This is the space for excitable town hall behavior. We're going to start this session, though, with a presentation. We heard earlier from Emily about the BBC, and I'm a great reader of the BBC website. And it's amazing as I read the BBC website on the extraordinary range of stories in which there is one most insightful, analytical, lucid commentator, Henrietta Moore. Henrietta is a polymath, covers a whole range of areas with enormous range of insight, has done a lot of serious thinking about this issue of the rise of populism and the challenges that presents to us. So it's with great pleasure to introduce Professor Henrietta Moore. Over to you, Henrietta.
Thank you very much, everyone. Wonderful, of course, to be here in Iceland and thrilling to be at What Works. So the rise of populism and the threat to social progress, well, it ought to be pretty obvious, I think. You know, division, extremism, mistrust are, of course, the opposite of social progress. And there is something very strange happening to our political institutions all around the world. They seem to be collapsing around our ears. But what kind of story are we really giving ourselves about this? What are we actually saying? What sense are we making of this? I think we have to be a bit careful here that we don't actually walk into a well-established populist trap of being too simplistic in our own thinking. So let's start with France, for example. I was in France last Sunday, down in a little village, and I went to see everybody voting. And of course, as soon as En Marche and the Front National got through to the second round, stock markets rose, the euro strengthened. There was enormous relief that somehow a populist wave had been beaten back at the very last moment. But of course, it is, of course, the first time in 50 years that neither the Socialist nor the Republican Party has got through to the last stage. So old-style politics seems out, new-style politics seems in. But I think that if we talk too much about populism in these kinds of circumstances, we might be in danger of occluding slightly what's actually happening. So another way to think about this result is to say, okay, let's think about people's experience of the political arena. And perhaps what we can say is that Macron is the vote for hope, and Le Pen is the vote for anger. Now, when we think about that, we realize that many people around the world are doing exactly what you're probably doing in this room when you think about politics, what Gloria Steinem was doing when we saw her on the video earlier. In other words, oscillating between hope and anger, experiencing both emotions, somehow wanting to be cosmopolitan and yet worrying about the erosion of jobs, pensions, and the quality of life. It's been said that when the final vote is taken in France, as many as 30% of the French electorate have said that they will decide on the day who to vote for. Now, that's a really large number of people who might be persuaded to vote for hope. Now, why is that people are so undecided up to the last moment? Well, we heard a lot earlier in the day about the gains of the last 30 years and all the things that we can celebrate. But in many of the richest countries of the world at the moment, people are feeling deeply dissatisfied with the quality of their life. Now, this dissatisfaction is actually being driven by real deprivation and need. So I don't know how many of you know that in London, child poverty is at 37%, which is a moral scandal in the 21st century. We heard earlier that 1 in 7 Americans are food short. Well, we're slightly better off in the UK. We're about 1 in 8 or 1 in 9. But look at the total figure. That's 8.4 million people lacking food security in the UK. And these numbers are deeply, deeply concerning. So how have we got to this place? Well, it didn't happen overnight. Social inequality is incredibly corrosive. If, for example, you increase income by 1%, in the most unequal societies, that only improves, or gives social progress, if you like, of 0.6%, whereas 1% of income increase in the most equal countries will give you 4.6% of improvement. Real wages in manufacturing in the US and the UK have actually been slowly declining in real terms since the 1970s. And successive governments have done nothing to redistribute resources and the value of all the growth that we've seen globally in the last 30 years. There's been a real arrogance about society's losers and an overwhelming complacency about the durability and resistance of an economic system that was evidently not sustainable. Now, of course, in the context of the world we all inhabit, in the so-called post-growth discussion, all of this seems very evident. The group thinking, the institutional conformity, the risk aversion, the short-termism are all laid bare for us to discuss. But if we're going to tackle all of this, I think we have to be very careful about talking about populism and about demonizing the people who are engaging with populism at the moment. You'll probably be aware that in the Brexit vote in the UK, for example, that many who voted leave on the basis that immigration and the movement of people was a threat to the sovereignty and prosperity of the country. What was very interesting is that in most regions where the leave vote was very high, the number of immigrants was actually very, very small. And this resulted in the Remain voters feeling not only hugely let down by their fellow citizens, but also labeling those people both ignorant and racist. Now, populism is a problem, and it's very toxic. We can't deny that. But if we over-focus our energies on populism, we might misrecognize the problem once again. We might actually be attending to the expression of that anger without looking at what's going on behind it and what we could do about it. So what could be the starting point for doing something about it? Well, let me just suggest, as you will probably all agree, that social progress and indeed global prosperity need to encompass what I call an ethics of diversity. That needs to be the starting point. Because social progress and prosperity are not single entities or things. They are themselves diverse. Notions of the good life differ. They're specific to cultural and social contexts. Humans are diverse, and so are their ways of flourishing and progressing. What we have to do, though, is work towards this ethics of diversity and not just simply assert it. Or worse than that, impose a form of progress that actually mitigates against freedom. We have to understand that there are very many forms of unfreedom in any vision of progress, and we need to be attentive to that. So how do we go about this? Well, I think as we heard earlier, we need to think about developing new languages and new settings in which to work through new forms of engagement. And it's these new forms of engagement that will create opportunities. And we can only do this if we start telling some new stories about the quality of our political life. So my answer to this is to think about those places and spaces where we need to meet challenges most urgently, and where enhanced participation from all citizens and from diverse citizens will have the biggest benefit in terms of the kind of democratic deficit we've been facing. So where are they? Well, I think there are two in the United Kingdom that are actually really pressing at the door. If you read a lot of the newspapers, you won't actually see them there, but if you listen to what's going on in communities, you will. So the first set of discussions is about what is decent work, not just who's employed and how many people are employed, but what is decent work, and what will be the future role of work in our lives. Now, this is a conversation that's going on not just in terms of the scare stories of, automation and robots, but a more general and genuine conversation about what will work mean for us in the rest of the 21st century. And the second area, I think, is the real push that's coming in the United Kingdom for a new settlement for social care, based really on making care in all its forms a key feature of the sustainable economies of the future. Now, over in the Institute for Global Prosperity in London, we believe in engaging citizens in debates around the future of work, and we see this as a key component in future prosperity. And what we've been doing in that work is not just consulting people or talking to them or working with them, but actually co-creating a vision of prosperity, looking at a collaborative approach which builds prosperity from harnessing together diverse groups of people who bring conflicting and perspectives, and perspectives which do not always agree. And it allows people then to see new forms of interconnection through complex problems. And this work is really built on the idea, and something that we share with the Social Progress Imperative, with whom we are collaborating in London on precisely this work, particularly in the borough of Barking and Dagenham. It depends on an idea that what you do in life matters, and that your work, in whatever it is, has to add value, it has to create meaning, it has to provide some kind of satisfaction, and that brings people together across a whole set of divides. It's a way of getting people engaged in focused foresight, or in thinking on how to make lives more livable and more worthwhile in the city. It really is co-creating a vision of prosperity and of social progress. Now, what I think is that the uncertainty of the present moment actually is allowing new national conversations to break through all across the world in different places and spaces. And what social progress will be about in the most, in the approximate future that we're facing, is taking a role in leading and shaping those new conversations at the local level, at the regional level, at the city level, and at the national level. And future prosperity will depend on that happening. We need new stories, but we can't imagine that we already know what social progress is and entails everywhere. That would be a mistake. We need to work with people to co-create these diverse forms of social progress and prosperity. So, as the Roman philosopher Seneca said, improvements are of sluggish growth, but the way to ruin is rapid. So let's avoid it. That's it.